The U.S. faces an imminent catastrophe. My guest, Bill Koenig of World Watch Daily News, has researched over 130 major catastrophes linked to U.S. foreign policy. And he also has inside information regarding a recent UN meeting that caused the Hamas attack and will open up a door for an attack in the U.S. Bill, tell me the first time you made the connection of a pattern between U.S. foreign policy regarding Israel and a major catastrophe.
Well, I'll tell you, Janie, it was interesting. You know, when you're doing watching news, watching events with a great interest in Israel and the Middle East, you watch and you see patterns. And what I saw over and over again when Arafat would come to the United States to have meetings, or U.S. presidents would talk about dividing the land of Israel or sending a Secretary of State to Israel, we'd have these very significant catastrophes, earthquakes, hurricanes at the very same time. And I thought, wow, there is something here. And when I moved to Washington, D.C., when I left Dallas to move our news organization to Washington, D.C., to work out of the White House, a Jewish believer introduced me to John McTernan. And John had tracked these events in a previous book, his God's Final Warning to America. Sid and you all had him on. And then John and I wrote Israel, the Blessing or the Curse. And we came together, political and the events, and brought the book together. But what was so interesting, Janie, we tried to get the book printed. I mean, we were finished in the summer of 2001. And it's just one thing after another. It's like, you know, warfare, whatever it is, that we couldn't get it done. And then 9/11 happened. And we found out shortly thereafter that President Bush had worked 17 days with Crown Prince Abdullah on a land for peace plan, a division of Jerusalem, and the creation of a Palestinian state, something Bill Clinton or his dad would never have done. But they finished the work on 9/10, according to the Washington Post, and then 9/11 happened. And then as soon as that happened, we were able to get the book on the street 2 weeks after. So Israel, the Blessing and Curse was on the street 2 weeks after 9/11. And I'd been warning President Bush, and I have 4 letters in my book, eye to eye. I warned him, don't touch land. If you do, there will be consequences. So I showed him that. I was at the White House the night of 9/11. We had a press briefing, and Ari Fleischer looked at me because I've been warning him, and just kept looking at his notes and looking at me right before the president's address. So that's kind of a long story or a long answer to your question, Janie, but the patterns were so obvious. And I noticed too, the greater the pressure on Israel to divide their land, the greater the corresponding catastrophe, which leads up to 9/11. And I say this when I speak to audiences all over the world, is the God of Israel did not produce the evil of 9/11, but he did not stop it. And that was a turning point for the whole peace process.
Well, right, it opens up a curse. I mean, that's even personally, if we open up the door, we can open up a curse in our lives. So this is a nation opening up a curse.
Absolutely.
And
I was going to say, Janie, what's interesting is the curse that came on America, or the curse that Israel was dealing with, the dealing with terrorism, had come on America and come on the world, because life as we know it changed dramatically, not only for the United States, but for U.S. peace partners around the world. So they were affected too. Our whole life changed dramatically at the time of 9/11 and afterwards.
yeah, now I find it interesting because you had said that you saw 2 major hurricanes move back to the ocean when a president said they wouldn't put pressure on Israel. So it's like working both ways.
Absolutely. One was 2005, right after the eviction of 9,500 Jews from their homes in southern Gaza and forced settlements in Samaria. And President Bush was with Ariel Sharon. And I might add, right after those 9,500 were removed from their homes, that was the beginning of Katrina. We can go into more detail later, but that was very significant. But so here you have George Bush with Ariel Sharon at the UN. And Bush says publicly, I will not pressure Israel to do what they do not want to do. And immediately, Hurricane Ophelia was starting to come toward the Outer Banks there in North Carolina. And as soon as he made that statement, that hurricane went back to the ocean.
Wow.
Instantaneously. And the other time was September 1 and September 2, 2010. You had Obama, Netanyahu, King Abdullah from Jordan, Mubarak from Egypt, and Abbas from the Palestinians, and they were at the White House to try an attempt to force a peace deal September 1 and 2, and we had a hurricane called Earl that was in the Atlantic that was heading towards Washington, D.C., and it was described as the size of Texas, and it was a Category 5, and then on September 2nd, 2010, Hillary Clinton at the State Department with Netanyahu and Abbas, and also Obama stated within 30 minutes of each other that they would not pressure Israel or the Palestinians to do what they don't want to do. Earl immediately went down to a Category 3 and went back to the ocean. And that is how sensitive the God of Israel is when you talk about creating an Arab state in the biblical heartland of Israel, Judea and Samaria, or dividing the city of Jerusalem. You see these kind of events. And again, the greater the pressure, the greater the corresponding catastrophe.
Now, what recent hurricanes have you seen when we started putting pressure on Israel?
Well, Hurricane Ian was the most significant. We had a couple this year. We had Hillary this year, and I think it was Ophelia. It was off the East Coast. And what happened, Biden was putting pressure on Israel to work out a deal with the Saudis. It was going to be a Israeli-Saudi Abraham Accord deal. So we had those this year, but which were significant. But the one that was the most significant was last year during the UN General Assembly. We had Biden talking about a two-state plan. We had Lapid, who was under pressure from Biden to talk about two states at the UN, which no Israeli leader ever specifically, publicly, in a speech would talk about a two-state plan. And Trudeau from Canada also complimenting Lapid's courage. So what we had first, right at this time, we had Hurricane Fiona, which is a major storm, was traveling through the Atlantic, heading towards Fiona. And when Trudeau specifically stated that he complimented Lapid and said it's necessary now to achieve two states, Fiona made a left-hand curve and went and hit the eastern coast of Canada, the most intense hurricane ever. And it changed paths right after Trudeau made those comments at the UN. 24 hours after Biden and Lapid were at the UN last September talking about a two-state plan, a tropical depression developed into Tropical Storm Ian and then Hurricane Ian and became a massive hurricane. And the day that Hurricane Ian hit the southern part of Florida was the day that Biden's ambassador at the UN Security Council was speaking of putting more pressure on, basically putting more pressure on the Palestinians, Israelis, saying now is the time to achieve the two-state vision. And Ian came ashore right at that time. She was saying this at the UN. Hurricane Ian is now the second or third costliest hurricane in U.S. history. It hit Florida distinctively. And so, yeah, we have Katrina and Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Ian, all three connected to Israel. But Ian was devastating. And it was right on the heels that whole time of what they were doing there at the UN.
Now, your book, Eye to Eye, Facing the Consequences of Dividing the Land. I mean, you have, it's, okay, just wait a minute. It is a massive book that has, it'll say exactly what the president or what they did coming against Israel and exactly what catastrophe. I mean, I'm like, the details in here are unbelievable. And if anyone wants to say, oh, it's a coincidence, I'm like, there's like no way it's a coincidence. So, and if people think they've heard everything, oh, about, well, whatever, no, you haven't heard some of the information that Bill is going to talk about. And we're going to get to more of, did we open up an attack for the United States? But I want to talk about Trump, because you said basically, any president that would come against Israel, there would be, a hurricane, there would be a catastrophe, of dividing the land. But Trump explained how, well, he did really good things for Israel, but then what happened? Explain.
President Trump was the best friend Israel ever had in the White House. He did more with the help of his ambassador, David Friedman, for Israel than all our American presidents combined. We'd heard Bush and Clinton and Obama talk about moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Trump did it. He also stated publicly that Israel has the sovereign right to the Golan Heights. He also got out of the Iran nuclear deal. And there's many, many other things that he did, but those three are so significant. And the favor was on Donald Trump. It was really on Donald Trump. But we pushed real hard to lobby the White House, don't touch the land, don't divide the land, because we knew that his son-in-law Kushner was working on a peace plan. He extended a tremendous amount of effort. We lobbied the White House, we lobbied Kushner, but he was so determined to create a peace deal. So on January 28, 2020, President Trump came forward with the Trump-Kushner plan, the Peace to Prosperity plan. And I was there at the White House in the East Room when they presented it, but President Trump also presented a map, something no other president had done, a specific map of the future metes and bounds of a Palestinian state, which is 70 to 80% of the land of Judea and Samaria. I talked to some staff members of the White House after that. I said, there's consequences. You've already experienced those consequences. They said, well, we never thought the Palestinians would take the deal anyhow. I said, it doesn't matter, because on January 28th, the afternoon of January 28th, Peter Navarro, White House advisor, was telling Fauci, Asner, our health secretary, and Mulvaney, the chief of staff, that the coronavirus that's coming, there had only been about 4 or 5 cases in America at that time, but he says, this is going to be an enormous problem. And so Kushner, all these guys were said, oh, no, it's not going to be that big a deal. So what happened, Navarro predicted 1 million loss of life, 3.5 trillion and above if something is not done immediately. And he put that in a memo the next day because he was furious that Fauci and Azar and Mulvaney laughed at him. And he warned the president, and that's exactly what happened. So I wrote a commentary, Life in America, before January 28th, the favor that was on President Trump, and life after January 28th, coronavirus. Few weeks later, we had 3.5 billion people worldwide that were in lockdown. But what was also important here, Janie, the international community within 24 to 48 hours after Trump's introduction at the White House, they came out and emphasized their two-state plan, which was the UN resolutions. They emphasized their backing of a two-state plan. And so consequently, we had almost a half the world in a lockdown at the mid to latter part of March. Unbelievable. But we look at the coronavirus pandemic and its connection to the Trump peace plan.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I saw that, because I didn't realize that date with Kushner and January 28th and then COVID right after that. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's the door that opened up this curse. It's almost like saying to the devil, hey, we just came against Israel, and hey, come in and destroy us. It's unbelievable how it's just like clockwork when it happens. Now, that had then led to the Abraham Accord. So why don't you explain that?
That's very significant because they didn't know what they were going to call this potential plan between Israel and Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. They didn't know what they would come up with. So they said, well, let's just call it the Abraham Accords. In other words, this land is for all descendants of Abraham. There was so that's where Abraham Accords came up with that name. Abraham Accords came up with Israel. There was a big deal at the White House on September 15th. Israel was there. The Bahraini leaders, the leader of the United Arab Emirates, and President Trump had a big signing event September 15th, 2020, of the Abraham Accords. And this was a normalization agreement. No land was transferred, but it continued the narrative of a two-state plan. And these leaders that were there and other Arab, Middle Eastern leaders that were at the UN a couple weeks later all identified, all said that they backed the normalization to stop Israel from extending sovereignty to 134 Jewish communities. They prefer calling it, they call it annexation, but we prefer calling it extended sovereignty, the rightful extension of sovereignty to 134 Jewish communities in Judea, Samaria. And what happened at the same time, when you saw the signing at the White House, in the corner of the TV screens was this hurricane called Sally. And that happens a lot of times. You'll have a political event of having to do with Israel, and at the same time, the catastrophe or the hurricane right there in the corner of the screen. And it was called Hurricane Sally. So as they're at the White House, this massive, slow-moving hurricane is developing into a monster rain producer. And that night, Hurricane Sally came ashore right after the Abraham Accord was signed at the White House. And one of our readers in New York wrote me and says, Bill, did you realize that Sally, the derivative of Sally, is Hebrew name Sarah? So in other words, Hurricane Sarah was slamming into the southern Gulf Coast at the time or right after the Abraham Accord was signed. Now that storm could have been called any other name, but the Hebrew derivative of Sarah, and the Lord identified through this hurricane that the land is for Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, not Hagar, not Ishmael. So this was, and then what happened 72 hours after the signing at the White House, Netanyahu goes home and they go into a 3-week lockdown because of coronavirus during Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot.
Oh, right after that.
Yes, right after that. So that financial blessing that they thought they would have by signing the Abraham Accords would actually cost 5 billion shekels, which all the financial economic benefit that they thought they would have in the first couple of years was wiped out during that 3-week lockdown. So Israel lost, they say, economically about 5 billion shekels from the lockdown.
Wow. Okay. Now, do you also believe, like with the Abraham Accords, that caused President Trump to not win the election?
The Abraham Accords, during Kushner pushed really hard that summer. When he was pushing hard, we'd had record hurricanes. And then when he'd back off, it would calm. The whole summer was like that. He'd work on it, announce a new one like Sudan, and other countries were coming. When he was working that hard all that summer, on up to 9/15, and then Sudan afterwards, there was hurricanes, massive record-setting hurricanes. It was one of the largest hurricane seasons in the history of the United States as the accords were being negotiated. And what also happened, the disruption of the whole political disruption because of coronavirus. Trump Kushner thought by pushing this unique peace deal, what they called it, normalization deal, this would be politically beneficial to him with the very important Jewish vote in key states. Had no influence at all. He still only got about 35% of the Jewish vote. The rest still went with Biden. But the main thing, Janie, it disrupted that whole summer from the time the peace plan was delivered on January 28th through the accords of September 15th. We had nothing but disruption throughout that whole summer and into the fall. Definitely affected, those two things definitely affected him politically, and sadly probably ended up to one way or the other, him not being the president any longer.
Right, and that the Abraham Accord opened up another door, which we're going to get to in a moment. Now, if you like this channel and if you like what the interviews, please subscribe. So it looks like the Abraham Accord led to Crown Prince Salman saying we can now cut a deal with Israel. That it led to the normalization agreement between the Saudis and Israel. Can you explain?
Yeah, this was extraordinary. And what we had, Janie, on September 22nd, Netanyahu at the United Nations spoke of a new day and a new era for peace in the Middle East. He was talking about what was getting close to an Israeli-Saudi normalization agreement. The White House had pushed it. They'd been very involved with it. We had the catastrophes and everything that associated with it this year. But what's important, and if you read the quote, his speech was so optimistic. This is a new time for Israel, new time for peace in the Middle East. This is going to open up quality relationships throughout, to paraphrase, throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. This is a time of peace. Ben Salman also was in New York at the United Nations, also speaking of this great moment in his interviews, his interviews with US TV. And he was very excited and hopeful. My friends in Israel were very concerned. What did Netanyahu do with Ben Salman? Because it was very quiet, very secretive. There was a concern that they were going to work some kind of arrangement out with the holy sites there in the old city. Was there going to be an arrangement with the Temple Mount? Also, was there going to be any kind of land traded? At the same time, too, he was keeping his intelligence, the IDF and others in the dark, even his own political party. No one knew what he was up to. And some people thought that this was Netanyahu's final deal. He's going to finish it, and this will be a swan song. But when you look at it, September 22nd, 2 weeks later, and one day on October 7th, is when we had this horrific, heinous, barbaric attack on 1,400 Israelis and many more. And to see the euphoria of 9/22 to seeing the horror of October 7th and since then is there's something there. There was something in the tragedy of this moment. The God of Israel did not produce the evil, but he didn't stop it for that moment.
Well, right, because they were making a deal that wasn't a deal that the Lord would approve of. But you also had said that Netanyahu's approval rating started going down too, correct?
It plummeted dramatically. You know, the thing about it, one of the reasons Netanyahu is back in office after multiple times of being the prime minister is that he would be the one that would be the strongest when it came into defending the Israeli state against Iran. That's one of the number one reasons is to deal with Iran. And that level of confidence in the Israeli public, the fact that this happened with Hamas and to a certain degree Hezbollah, has seen his approval rating plummet dramatically.
Well, and also, I mean, with Hamas, Hezbollah, are they basically proxies of Iran?
Absolutely. And I think former Ambassador Nikki Haley, our ambassador to the UN, said, without Iran, there would be no Hamas or Hezbollah. They're the funders. They provide billions of dollars a year to Hamas. Most of it goes to Hezbollah, that now has 150,000 rockets and 15,000 missiles pointed at Israel. Iran is also deploying missiles in Yemen and Iraq, and they are a major problem. There's no doubt. And right now, there's been drone attack, over 23 attacks on our base, drones or bombs or things like that, affecting U.S. soldiers. And also, this is so unique because we are moving in our major aircraft carriers. USS Gerald Ford is in the Western Mediterranean right now. And then we're moving the Eisenhower into the Persian Gulf, and we have other ship groups there as well. So we're basically, and I just saw today, we have 2 B-1 bombers that are just landed in our Air Force base in Turkey. So we're doing everything we can, it seems to be, to keep Iran at bay and keep them out of this conflict and let Israel take care of the problem they have with Hamas. But Houthi rebels have declared war against Israel, and that's Iranian backed, and they've been trying to send missiles into Israel. Those have been taken out of the air by U.S. ships. But we're at a very unique time because of the players. Russia has its comments. Putin, Lavrov have stated the only reason there isn't peace in the Middle East because the United States has been the one directing it. And China is President China just had a meeting with Putin recently in China. So what's China up to? I don't know. We're just in a very unique time, Janie, but I think a lot of us are looking at Jeremiah 49:34 through 39. And that has to do with Elam, which is modern day Iran. And a fair amount of us think that that will be the first hit, that Israel or the United States, or Israel and the United States, will do something to take out the nuclear facilities in southern Iran. And that could be the fulfillment of Isaiah 49:35 through 39. We also are talking about Isaiah 17:1, when Israel more than likely will bomb Damascus, and Damascus will no longer exist as a city. And of course, a lot of people have been talking about Ezekiel 38 and 39, Russia, Turkey, Iran, Sudan, Libya, eventually being pulled in by God into Israel and be destroyed. So we just have a lot of players within those scriptures that are taking positions right now. Is this the time? I don't know. We know the Iranians are very patient, strategic, and they have a plan. So, but the main thing, Janie, that's so unique about this time is the amount of international attention and the movement of international carrier groups, especially the U.S. and China, which has moved 6 ships into the region.
Now, we're seeing headlines of threats to the United States. I mean, I haven't seen headlines like this, and it's pretty scary. It's like the same threats to Israel as the same threats here. So how did Biden open up the door? I mean, I know that he gave Iran, $6 billion, and they say if you really look at it with all of the it's really like equivalent to 60 billion. So, and also I'd like you to, let's go back a little bit. When Biden took office, explain some of the things that he did that were very pro-Palestinian.
Well, when he first took office, he immediately said, okay, we're going to start funding UNRWA again, which is a lot of people believe that's the radicalization of the youth of the Palestinian communities. Reopening up the Palestinian office in Washington, D.C. that Trump closed, reestablishing a focus on the 2-state plan at the United Nations, and just making the whole peace process a priority, more of a priority than even Trump. And all this was decided in 1 week, and that's when we had this polar vortex that hit Texas in February of 2021. This was a record-setting event that hit Texas. This was an incredibly costly event. We had parts of Texas without power for 3, 4, or 5 days, some up to a week. All at the time, all those things I just mentioned, that all happened in a week, and the polar vortex dipped down and hit Texas, the whole state, an energy-producing state, and created absolute havoc from most areas of the state, as well as Oklahoma and Louisiana.
Well, I mean, I really believe that Biden has opened the door. I mean, he, along with that Netanyahu and Salman, because he's been pushing for that, Israel and the Saudis to have some kind of peace plan. So to me, that whole thing opened up the curse for Hamas to attack Israel. But now, again, we're seeing these headlines here, and Iran says they don't only say death to Israel, they say death to America. So they don't like us either. So I really believe that what he's done has opened the door. What would you say?
Absolutely. I think it's provoking. I think his recent speech, when he's talking about giving 60 billion plus to the Ukraine, 16 billion to Israel, and 5 billion to the area around Taiwan, which infuriates China. China believes Taiwan is theirs. So what is there's a provocation of our enemies. in his speech to the country about after he got back from Israel. He was talking about Putin, how destructive, and to paraphrase, how bad of a guy he was. And to us to move our ships into the region. These things, I mean, we can wake up in the morning and we could have some pretty serious things happen with Russia because they have nuclear capability. Iran is very close to having a nuclear bomb if they don't already. Their enrichment is in the mid 80s. I think it just has to be over 90 to be capable of an atom bomb. And also our provocation through funds and comments about Taiwan, which infuriates China. So I don't know what they're up to. I am surprised if this was a Republican president, the international community or international media, especially the U.S. media, would be chastising our role in the Ukraine and our movement of ships. But they are not. They're all but provoking Biden last year to doing more with Russia in the Ukraine. And so I don't know what's up. I'm concerned in some ways. And like you mentioned, the southern border, that's been a total joke, a farce. It's so bad, it's intentional. Just like the movement out of Afghanistan like that. It was so stupid, it had to be intentional. And I think the same thing. So I know one good thing about the COVID or the coronavirus crisis, it did open up the threat of the World Economic Forum and their ultimate plan of digital currencies, social credit scores, digital passports, World Health Organization control over even the United States. There's just a lot of things that could happen quickly if we move into more conflict with these countries, especially with Russia and Iran. You know, as I watch these events and have for over 25 years, I watched the disruptive forces that could take place. And obviously, from the people that I've spoken to, China and Russia look at the opportunity that they have now, I'm sure Iran as well, with President Biden, whose approval rating is collapsing and is making a lot of real precarious decisions and even public statements that sometimes just don't track, period.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's looking like that more is being exposed of bribes that he's taken, and that they actually have all the proof. That I think there was a new one that just came out with the House committee, that $200,000 that he took as a bribe. So it looks like he's getting more exposed as he's been coming against Israel.
Absolutely. There's definitely, I believe, a connection there. And I think the more pressure, the worse it gets. They have been they have stood with Israel. Biden, General Austin at the Pentagon, and Blinken, who is Jewish, they have stated publicly that Israel has the right to defend themselves and eliminate Hamas. They have they've helped them militarily. They've sent weapons. They have been very cooperative. So I think that's kind of buffered the curse. But at the same time, if Biden's last name, if Biden or his son's last name was Trump, they would be put away already, and we'd never see him again. There's just two worlds here are in Washington, D.C., between the Republicans and conservatives, and the conservatives are up against the social networks, mainstream media, and the Democratic Party. And it's a very formidable foe.
Well, I also think, they always play both sides. I mean, he may be saying, Israel has the right to fight Hamas, but meanwhile, here Iran, here's like a whole bunch of money, so you can use that to
that's a good point.
For Hamas to attack Israel. So it's like
that's a good point. We forget that. He's attacked our oil and gas companies in America, while Iran is now producing 3 million barrels a day, I think they're up to, which puts a lot of money in their pocket, was even willing to give $6 billion or allow $6 billion to be transferred to the Iranians, trying to resurrect the Iran nuclear deal that Obama put in place. Absolutely. He's done a lot. He's done a lot to help Iran. How ironic.
Yeah, very true. Is there anything else that you want to add?
Watch the main leaders, Biden, Putin's comments, President of Iran, Prime Minister Netanyahu, Erdogan. I didn't mention Erdogan of Turkey is really attempting to take advantage of this to win favor with the Arab street. He tried to do that with the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and then Al Sisi, the general, overthrew the Muslim Brotherhood, and that kind of took Erdogan out of the picture. But Erdogan from Turkey, we're going to watch him very, very carefully because he's posturing right now. He was open to improve relationships with Israel, but he's been a big backer of Hamas. He says they're not a terror group. And in the previous conflicts with Israel, he's helped provide funds and also cover for some of the Hamas leaders. And also Qatar. Qatar's kind of playing both ends against the middle right now, wanting to improve their relationships with the West. At the same time, they've provided a lot of money to the Palestinians. So we're just watching the players. I think that's the best thing to do is watch the players. Get your news from websites like ours and other Middle East, especially Israeli websites. Also ours, watch.org. And we're watching this around the clock. And we're just at a very pivotal, very interesting time, biblically speaking.
I totally agree now. And yep, and the website is up there. So, and it's definitely amazing because you have so much news that's related to Bible prophecy and it's just updated all the time. So it's an amazing site. But I want to share a dream with you because this is what made me start thinking about you. I had a dream in September, and this was before the attack with Israel. And I won't explain the whole dream. You all can just look at my other video that explains the whole dream. But the essence of the dream was to actually then look at Erdogan. And so that it was like all eyes should look at him. And then I then found out that he was like very pro-Palestinian. But see, the dream switched. And then all of a sudden in the dream, I saw Florida having the worst flooding. So I woke up and, and I did a video on it. But then I thought of you. That's because I was like thinking, okay, he's pro-Palestinian. This is before the attack happened in Israel. And all of a sudden we're seeing something happen with, flooding in Florida. So that's how this whole interview came about, Bill, because I realized, wait a minute, you're the one who knows the parallels way better than anyone. So just wanted to, so yeah, it was very interesting that you mentioned him. And I'm really wondering if there's going to be something that he's going to do that we're going to be part of, the United States, Biden will be part of, that would try to cause a flooding in Florida. So anyway.
Well, I tell you, he's a major player. There is no doubt, Janie. And I think in some ways he's a more significant player than Putin. And I really think we really need to keep an eye on him. Some people even believe that Turkey's the major Gog Magog player, not Russia. So
right.
I think we need to follow him very closely. Also, Trump was considering closing our U.S. base that's in Turkey. We have nuclear weapons there, and we just put 2 B-1 bombers on the ground there. So I don't know what's going to happen, but isn't that an interesting scenario? He's really boldly coming out in favor of Hamas and the Palestinians while we're putting 2 bombers in there. And also, and I believe we have nuclear weapons there. That was discussed when Trump was thinking about closing that base when we were having some problems with Turkey. So, yeah, I think that's a good one, Janie, to watch as well. So Turkey and Iran are going to be major players in all of this, no doubt about it. And how we respond, how the United States responds. And also, I give credit to the UK Prime Minister. He has been so bold, despite the problems he has with Muslims in the UK and London. He's been bold in Israel's right to defend themselves against this terror. And so it's going to be very interesting in the next couple months how this all plays out. Again, Iran's very, very patient, very strategic, and they have a plan. And they're very disciplined, too. They won't do anything until they're ready. At the same time, Israel has a red line, too, that they're obviously getting closer to as well and would have to consider preemptive strikes.
Right. So there's a lot to keep an eye on. But
Oh, yes.
wow. Okay, Bill, thank you so very much for being on the program. And again, everyone, you need to look at his website and also buy his book, Eye to Eye. It's amazing information. You saw it. I showed you how thick the information is of when we come against Israel, what happens, the catastrophes that happen. Thank you, Bill, so much.
Thank you, Janie. God bless you.
God bless you too.